This is looking right in the teeth of a gale, and that gale could lead us to a recession.
It's coming. And it's not if, but when. The end of Australia's property boom time.
Party's over.
It's definitely over, and it's going to be over for quite some time.
Tonight, experts across the industry, the market analyst, the estate agent, the investor, the data scientist and the liquidator deliver their sobering verdicts.
Get out while you can.
Get out while you can, absolutely.
At the worst end of the spectrum, if everything turned against us, we could see property prices 40 to 45% down from their peaks, which is a huge deal.
Who loses out big in the next couple of years?
Everyone.
Home ownership is our national obsession, but are we finally waking up from the great Australian dream?
I gotta get home, there's a garden to tend, all the fruits on the ground, the birds have all moved back into my attic.
Every house has a story.
Young learn to fly, I will patch up the holes once again.
For more and more of us, that story is going south.
It's a shameful experience, especially when I have done well, and then to put my hand up and say, look, I do need help, but I've needed help for a while.
In streets and suburbs across Australia, families are losing the mortgage battle.
I don't think I'm the only one who's struggling. I don't think I'm the only one. There's a lot of people out there struggling. I mean, this minute I'm talking to you, not knowing if I'll be here for the next 6 months or not.
For some, it's become a debt trap existence with no way out.
One we've got on the market now, we've had on the market for 18 months. And still not sold. It's something which you think about all day.
For as long as most of us care to remember, or perhaps only as long as we want to remember, property prices in Australia have only gone in one direction, at least in our big cities. Now, not only do we have the most inflated housing prices on the planet, but our property frenzy has generated statistics that stagger the rest of the world. Our personal mortgage debt is stratospheric, actually at levels America reached just before the GFC. And worse still, Australia's economy is more dependent on housing than any other on earth. For decades, housing loans have been our country's financial bedrock. It means if mortgages now fail, the entire Australian economy is threatened. How much does Australia have tied up in mortgages?
So there's $1.7 trillion held by the banks in mortgages for owner-occupiers and investors. And that's about 65% of their total lending. That's higher than any other country in the Western world by a long way.
Data scientist Martin North of Digital Finance Analytics says the problem is blindingly obvious. Australia is addicted to debt.
There's probably no country in the world more susceptible to the ramifications of a housing crash than Australia.
We are uniquely exposed at the moment because as a society and as a government and as a regulatory system, we're all banking on the home price engine. It just goes on giving and giving and giving, right? But it's not going to.
The US housing crash in the mid-2000s was triggered by homeowners forced to foreclose by soaring levels of mortgage debt.
Traders say this is the craziest day they have ever seen in these markets.
Economies around the world
43%
went into free fall.
Everything and more has been completely wiped out.
The Dow traders are standing there watching in amazement.
I'm drawing parallels Australia now and where the US was in 2006 and 2007. We've got a debt bomb, we've got a debt crisis, and at some point it's going to explode in our face.
Welcome to our latest post covering finance and property news with a distinct...
Martin streams advice and data to the market based on his surveys of homeowners in mortgage distress. What he's seeing out there are more and more of us going deeper and deeper into the red.
We've got a lot of people sitting on big loans with no ability to be able to service them.
Increasing mortgage distress means a new word is now stalking our suburbs: foreclosure.
It's where the developers are desperate for buyers.
Desperate for buyers at the moment.
Major real estate companies refused our requests to interview their agents on the housing front line.
Your town?
But brave agent Peter Unan is defying his industry colleagues to speak the truth. The market is down and still a long way from the bottom.
Did you guys used to always sit in the office thinking, all right, the good times are going to end soon?
100%. 100%. Doesn't last forever.
In his patch of Sydney's west, house prices are plunging.
So what would be the median price in an area like this?
You're looking at about $1 million.
And what would it have been a year ago?
About 1.2.
So they've lost $200,000 in the space of a year.
Yeah.
Peter has seen foreclosures rise 600% in his area. And other agents we spoke to off camera confirmed that number.
The mortgage stress is definitely being felt, especially in this area. People are coming and asking to put their property maybe back on the market because it might have been on the market for 4 to 6 weeks and it's struggling to sell.
Our big mistake? Believing that house prices would keep going up and up forever.
Were we all in fantasy land there for a while?
The market was clearly overvalued. There's no doubt about that.
Even when we went to the real estate industry's most respected market analyst, Louis Christopher of SQM Property Appraisal, he couldn't have been more blunt. Although to him and the industry, it's not a crisis, it's a correction.
Is it the correction we had to have?
For Sydney and Melbourne, yes, it was a correction we had to have. On our numbers, Sydney was effectively over 40% overvalued and Melbourne was overvalued by about the same amount.
I've got the view that there were so many people all on the same drug, right? The banks, the Reserve Bank, and individuals, and everyone was expecting and hoping that prices would always go up.
As house prices drop, banks claim they're working with homeowners in distress. Truth is, for many, it's payback time.
I've had the power turned off 3 times, 4 times. I've put into the service station and put $20 worth of fuel in my car and pretended that my card wouldn't work, knowing that there's been no money in my account.
Bradley Hart is a suburban tradie. A change of jobs and reduced income triggered a downward spiral of falling behind on his mortgage, and he's now being hounded by his bank.
The bank made it clear that I missed a payment. They have the ability to come and foreclose on the house, give me a vacate notice within 2 weeks, sell the property.
Do you see plenty more people defaulting on their home loan over the next year or two?
These are individuals and households that are actually right up against it. And therefore, my prediction is that over the next 12 months or so, yes, defaults are going to rise. We've got about 52,000 households we think that will default over the next year.
In Melbourne, an illness has Mohammed Zouid on the mortgage ropes. He knows that knockout blow is coming, even though everyone in his tight-knit family is pitching in.
We haven't had any holidays at all leaving the house for the last 4 years. We didn't have a good car for the last 4 years. Yeah, you can't enjoy the life you're supposed to enjoy at your own house.
Those like Mohammed, who bought at the market peak, now face being trapped in a mortgage prison.
So a lot of people start out trying to buy this straight off the bat. That's not the way to go.
That's a mistake. You put a dirty great noose around your neck and you can't do anything.
Adelaide property investor Bushy Martin blames us for any coming crisis. Australians who mortgaged themselves up to their eyeballs, buying their dream house before they could actually afford it. It took Bushy 20 years to buy his dream house. He did it by renting where he wanted to live, but buying investment properties where he could afford. He calls it rent vesting, but it's not the way that most of us have bought our houses.
We've had it very comfortable for a long time in this country, and because of the way the world now operates, we expect to have everything now. And I blame the iPhone for it. That's the iPhone, I own everything now routine that we've all become used to.
People just scroll Instagram and go, well, I should be living like that.
That's me. I want to be them. Absolutely right.
But it can go belly up very quickly.
Very quickly. Absolutely very quickly. If you're getting into those sorts of areas at the very peak of the market and having to live a very basic lifestyle just to cover the mortgage. There don't need to be too many changes in anything to tip that over the edge.
Coming up, the bank's latest tough tactics.
It's a nightmare scenario, but it's not completely unrealistic.
And how you can beat them.
Some people can afford to sit, others can't.
There are now nearly 1 million Australian homeowners suffering from serious mortgage stress who, despite cutting back wherever they can, simply don't have the income to keep up with their loan repayments. But those already doing it hard are about to do it a whole lot harder, thanks in part to the banks who lent them their mortgages in the first place. The last couple of weeks have brought two grim and ominous headlines.
Bank data shows that nearly a half of all homeowners trying to refinance their mortgages are being knocked back. Compare that to only 5% a year ago. And now some banks are doing what many prayed would never happen, making the mortgage pain even worse by raising interest rates. Data scientist Martin North.
A lot of people bought in relatively recently with massively large mortgages, highly leveraged. The banks were way too loose in their lending standards. So we have a lot of people with not much wriggle room now. You can't refinance because nobody will refinance you. You can't sell the property because there's not enough equity. I mean, that's a nightmare scenario, but it's not completely unrealistic.
So you think it's very clear that so many of the people that we see on the brink now have almost been set up to fail by the bank?
There is no doubt that they've got loans they should never have got.
Some people can afford to sit, others can't. The ones that can't afford to sit should effectively sell. Get out while you can?
Get out while you can, absolutely. Get out while you can.
Jamison Lautet is a leading liquidator, the last port of call when owners default or banks call in their mortgages. It's a good business in bad times.
Mortgage resales have certainly increased, and I think it's reflective of the banks realising that property prices are going to deteriorate.
But you think if the banks can do the mortgages over and cover their own backside, they're happy to do so?
I think the banks are going to cover their own arse. And I think that realistically, if they foresee that they can get their money back before everyone else, then they will do so.
A reality check is coming.
I think the reality check is coming, and I think it's not too far away. The question is, how big is the cliff?
First off the cliff will be homeowners and investors with interest-only loans. 70-year-old John Norris was about to retire on the rent from a small portfolio of investment properties in Adelaide. He'd bought them with interest-only loans, which he'd been paying faithfully. Then he got a letter from his bank.
So that's it. That's the notice that no more interest only.
That's right.
The bank suddenly switched his loans to interest and principal.
How much does that mean your repayments go up each month once you get that notification?
Well, that increased by 57%.
Your monthly repayments?
Monthly repayments, yes, which was pretty staggering. We didn't budget for that.
Is it feasible? Can you do that?
Well, no, we've struggled since then, and we've been back to the bank 2 or 3 times to negotiate with them. But at this stage, they're playing hardball and sticking by their guns. So I've been involved in property most of my life, and
Johnny's now forced to sell his properties if he can and go back to work. His retirement plan, a bitter dream.
Have the banks shown much compassion in the way they've dealt with you?
No, they haven't shown any compassion whatsoever.
Johnny's a casualty of banks calling in the interest-only loans that they so freely offered until recently. His mate, property investor Bushy Martin, is mad as hell.
You've seen John, you've seen his wife. What's it done to them?
Devastating, Tom. Absolutely devastating. And they feel helpless in relation to being able to do anything because no one's listening.
There'd be thousands upon thousands of people across Australia in the exact same boat as John right now. Retirees who thought they were just about there and now whack. Completely different game.
Absolutely. So for no fault of their own coming up to the finish line, they've been very severely penalised, and it's having some major anxiety and stress impacts and financial impacts on people's lives at a point when they should be really enjoying them.
Perhaps the biggest pointer that a crash could be coming is the behaviour of the banks. In the course of covering this story, real estate industry insiders have told us the banks want to keep foreclosure sales secret at all costs. In fact, the order went out explicitly on foreclosure sales that we requested to film. Do not talk to 60 Minutes. Put simply, the banks don't want us to know just how bad things really are.
It's just one more dirty secret from the banks. Market analyst Louis Christopher.
Why do you think the banks are so secretive about how they deal with these foreclosures?
Well, I think they're trying to stop anger, resentment towards them, potentially stop any type of panic that's out there. But at the same time, I think as a community, we are owed at least a little bit more transparency in terms of what is going on.
The fact is that the banks know that we're on the edge of a potential precipice. On pretty much every metric that you can think about, we have way more debt than we should, and we're sleepwalking into a crisis next year, in my view.
Hello, I'm Sarah Abo. Thanks for watching. To keep up with the latest from 60 Minutes Australia, make sure you subscribe to our channel. You can also download the 9Now app for full episodes and other exclusive 60 Minutes content.